Welcome back to another one of our TVE courses. This is your instructor Alex Voss, and I'm very happy to have you back for another one of our classes. This is the beginning of a series on video editing, which is part of video production. You know, video editing is something that everybody has an opinion about when they're doing video editing, and what I've come to believe is that the editing program you like to use the most is the one you've learned first, or the one you've learned to master first. Video editing is a process of taking a video footage, just like they used to do with film footage back when, and you'd go shoot something, you know, like an outside scene or whatever you're shooting, and then you'll cut it together to make it have more meaning, or, you know, follow a script, or follow a plan or a storyboard or whatever, where you can actually plan out the way it's supposed to look and make it, you know, be your creation, your creativity. Now, I'm a 5-time Emmy Award winner, and so I know a little bit about video editing. And I think in this course I'm going to try and cover all the basics, you know, what you do at the very first part, and you go on from there. You know, there's a thing, whenever you talk to someone about video editing, it always seems to boil down to, well, nowadays, what's your favorite kind of program that does the video editing? You know, back in, you know, the 70s and before, I mean, the early 60s, they had the first videotape was what we called the quad tape. It was 2-inch tape, and they used to actually physically splice the tape together. They'd put the tape on a cutter, and then they'd sprinkle some iron filings on it or a magnetic powder on it, and you could actually see the control tracks on the tape, and you would actually splice the tape and tape it back together and make it so that the control tracks, which were on the bottom edge of the tape, were lined up in where you didn't have a video jump. And then it got better, you know, eventually they got to where they could do all electronic editing, where you'd have one tape deck like a 2-inch machine, and then you'd be rolling a record on another one, and then you just take the video you know, recording and play it back on one machine, and then edit cuts only one after another onto your new tape electronically. And so that was cuts only editing, and that sort of migrated up into 1-inch machines, and then 3/4-inch machines, and then beta machines, which was the Sony product, and then even things like VHS and all the tape formats. And then they also came up with something called A/B roll editing, and that was where you had 2 machines, and both those, or actually you had 3 machines. You had a record machine and 2 playback machines, and those machines, you would put your source footage on the A or B machine, and then you could actually roll them simultaneously, and you could actually do a dissolve between what was on machine A and what was playing on machine B, and then that would record on the record deck, which gave you a lot better appearance than just doing you know, cuts only editing, is, you know, where you just take a section and you'd move it over. So that was cuts only, A/B roll. And then they also went to multi-layering, where you'd actually have a bunch of machines running at once, and then you could have an effects that would go in, where you could do like a Chroma Key, which is the thing where you actually have a green screen in the background, or you have you're standing in front of black or whatever, and then you can actually make the person or the object appear in front of something else that really isn't even there. But what we're going to do is talk about, you know, what we're doing today is video editing software systems. So this is a software that goes on different computers, and some software works better on some kinds of computers. But let me talk about the basic video editing software that you can buy today, and what, in my opinion, are the pros and cons of each one. Now, of course, this is dividing up between the 2 categories of a consumer-based, low-end video editing system, and then a more professional system. So let's talk about some of the basic ones. The first one that comes to mind is the Avid Media Composer, and of course the Avid video editing systems. Avid was probably has probably been the editing software of choice for professional video editors. Avid is something that you can do very powerful and complex video productions with. Unfortunately, Avid is pretty difficult to learn, and it's also very picky. You know, you can only run Avid on certain kinds of computers, you have to have a computer that is made to work with Avid. It has to have a specific kind of video card. You have to have a specific amount of memory storage in it, and size of hard drives, and the processor, and all of this has to come into alignment. So basically you have to buy a particular computer that will work with Avid, which can be real difficult. So that means that you're going to spend a lot on your software. Avid's expensive. And you're going to spend a lot on your hardware for the computer. The thing about Avid is that it also takes everything that you bring in as a source footage, and it records it as a specific file type. And so all your video that's coming in has to then be either recorded in as with something that's playing live, or transcoded into the Avid file system. And so that it takes a long time sometimes to bring things in. And so you have to be prepared for that with Avid. And also those video files, especially in high definition, take up a lot of hard drive space. But that said, you know, and aside from other things, Avid is software that's very powerful, but it also has a tendency to crash sometimes, a lot more than other programs. And really, to keep Avid running, you really need to have an Avid support contract, which means you're going to be paying so much every year, every month to keep your Avid running. But if you really want to take a lot of time to learn a video editing system and do really professional productions, Avid will work. And most of the professional video editors, at least lately, are migrating to Avid. But if you're wanting to do something, you know, without spending a lot of money, there's a lot of other solutions and a lot of very powerful video editing software that you can use. The second one I'm going to talk about is Adobe Premiere. Adobe Premiere, the way you edit with Adobe Premiere and the way you edit with Avid is very similar. You know, what you'll do is you'll do a mark in and a mark out, and you'll sort of do your scene first and then bring it down to the timeline usually, even though you can do cuts only in both systems. Adobe Premiere is also a very powerful and good video editing system, and it has the advantage of being compatible with a whole lot more computers and compatible with all the Adobe products. You know, if you want to bring in something from another Adobe product like After Effects, or you want to bring in something from like Adobe Photoshop, it's a lot easier to bring it into Adobe Premiere than you would with Avid. Even though Avid will take things from the Adobe products, it's a little more difficult with Avid than it is with Adobe. Now, of course, I'm going to hear a lot of people saying, well, I don't agree with you, but then the thing is, you know, anytime you talk about video editing, it's an opinion. Because someone learns on Avid and they think it's the best thing ever. Someone learns on Adobe and they think it's the best thing ever. And someone learns on Sony Vegas and it's the best thing ever. But Avid's, a high power professional system, and Adobe is a high power professional system. Even to the point where the movie Avatar was edited on Adobe Premiere, even though it was the high-end professional Premiere. And both of these can do up to 4K video, which is film grade, and so that's a very powerful system. So Adobe is really good. Now, the one big drawback about Adobe is they don't just sell you Adobe anymore. You have to, it's like you're renting Adobe. You never fully own it. You have to pay on it monthly or yearly for the product. You don't get to actually buy a disc or buy a license and that's your product forever. It's more of a rental, so you're always going to be tied to Adobe if you go with an Adobe product. Okay, now let's talk about some other ones. Now, my favorite video editing system was Final Cut Pro, and that was up until Final Cut Pro 7, which was a Macintosh product, came from Apple Computer. And probably up until Final Cut Pro 7, that was the video editing software that was taking over the world, and as far as video editing professionals were concerned. You had a very powerful, good computer that you could run a very powerful, good software on, and it worked seamlessly. It didn't break down that much, and you could really show your creativity and work hard. And it was actually comparable with the strength of Avid as far as what you could do. And you could do it on Adobe, not on Adobe, but on Final Cut Pro pretty easily and seamlessly, and get your work done and not have to worry about crashes and so forth. And so up until Final Cut Pro 7, that was my favorite all-time video editing software. Unfortunately, Apple didn't want to pay the cost of the royalties to the person that designed the Final Cut series up until 7, and so they decided to save some money. And when they came out with Final Cut 10, it was a totally different editing system. Now, a lot of people, they say, well, I love my Final Cut 10. Well, if that's probably what you learned on and that's what you got used to and so forth, that's fine. I just don't see, as a video editing professional, how I could edit on Final Cut 10 and not have my creativity stomped on because of all the ways and things they do with Final Cut 10 that make you go away from the traditional video editing style. Now, that said, Final Cut 10, which when it first came out, I thought, oh great, another Final Cut. I was all excited, and when I got it and put it on my computer, I realized, oops, this is nothing but a fancy iMovie. And not only that, it's the iMovie that was more difficult to use than the original iMovie. And obviously, whoever designed the original Final Cut 10 and the original iMovie made a really good video editing system, but it departed dramatically from traditional video editing practices. And so, you could teach someone, you could take like someone that never knew video editing before, and they could edit on iMovie, and then they could edit on Final Cut 10, which is just a fancy iMovie. And I know the people out there talking about iMovie right now are just screaming at me, but if you learned on a powerful video editing system that could really do everything, you could put everything on a timeline and you can manipulate it, you would understand how handicapped you are with Final Cut 10. Now, Apple's tried to compensate some and put all kinds of goodies on the Final Cut 10 to make it better, but they still don't follow the traditional video editing style that came down from way back when. And I know there's a lot of people that are going to differ with me, but I've edited on Avid, I've edited on Adobe, I've edited on Final Cut the 7 and before, and I've edited on Final Cut 10. And yes, you can turn out a really good product on Final Cut 10, but who wants to fight a video editing system like that? And it's so backwards from what I'm used to as a professional video editor. I've really felt like Apple, went nuts when they actually went to Final Cut 10. But there's a lot of people that are learning on Final Cut 10 and they think it's the best thing ever. And it's like if you learn to ride on a unicycle, you think that's the greatest thing, and then the people that are riding bicycles think you're crazy to be riding on a unicycle. Well, you can get down the road on a unicycle and you can get down the road on a bicycle, but I would think the bicycle's a little easier, and that's sort of like my close comparison to what Final Cut 10 and say the other more traditional video editing systems are. And so, Avid would have probably, not Avid, Apple would have probably owned the video editing world if they hadn't dramatically departed with video editing software systems and went to this enhanced Final Cut, that was just an enhanced iMovie. And so they just sort of left all the professional video editing people behind, and most professional video editing people would not put up with that, and so they moved to something else. Now, that said, a lot of professional video editing people have figured out how to do good video on Final Cut 10. But and if you love Final Cut 10, I think that's great. You just don't know what you're missing, and you really don't understand what you can do with other systems that don't have all the limitations that Final Cut 10 has. Yeah, you know, and that's just coming from a person that loved Final Cut before 10 and thought that was the best system ever. And it's just sad because Apple would have owned the video editing world if they hadn't departed and, you know, decided not to pay the royalties anymore, didn't understand how video is really done, and then, you know, went to this great departure, which is a fancy consumer software. But, you know, that's my opinion, and I think a lot of people in video editing that are professional video editors agree with me on that. Now, so, you know, so we lost our good editing systems on Apple. You know, unless you want to go back to Final Cut 7, but then again, you have a real hard time, you know, with that early version of importing HD video files. And so, yes, you can bring in HD video files into Final Cut, even though you have to bring it in as if it's from a camera. So that's a problem there, even though you can do it. It's just, if you like Final Cut, you don't know what you're missing with other programs. Okay, of course, it's going to work all the time, except you're real limited in what you can do. Even if they give you all those fancy templates and stuff, it's still not, you know, if you're using a template, are you really being creative? You know, that's just an opinion. I can hear some of you screaming out there, but I'm just talking about someone who's like me, that's a multiple Emmy Award winner, that's worked with all kinds of video editing software and has an insight, a little more insight into all the differences in what you can do. So, you know, we're having a lot of issues, like Avid is hard to run. It tends to crash a lot, and it costs a lot of money to keep it going if you get the Avid support contract. Adobe, great system for Adobe Premiere, but you can't own it, you have to rent it. What do you do if you're out renting it and you're in the middle of a project and it runs out? I don't know, maybe it'll just keep running, I don't know, but I think what I've heard from Adobe is something you rent, or you just have to pay on continuously to keep it running, which I don't like that. And here, Final Cut, you know, greatest one ever, and then they dropped it and went with something really strange, and you know, lots of people were just so upset with Apple over that. So here's your selections. And so what do you go to? Now, the one that is my current favorite is Sony Vegas. And, you know, a lot of people say Sony Vegas. Well, you know, I've edited on all of them. And the thing is, Sony Vegas, you can buy it. The big drawback about Sony Vegas is it doesn't run on a Mac. You know, I wish I could have what I consider the world's best video editing system running on the world's best computer. I suppose you could do it if you took the Mac and you use Boot Camp. But that said, Sony Vegas is great for me because I do a lot of video editing. I mean, I'll do a lot of video editing every weekend. I do a lot of video editing where I go videotape churches and different things every week, and I can just throw all that stuff on the timeline, and I can get my video editing project cranked out without crashing or having to call tech support at Avid, or having to go through all the hoops you have to do with Final Cut 10 if you want to do like a live video. And I know people from Final Cut are going to say, well, yeah, but it'll sync sound and you can do the multicam. Well, yeah, sort of. And so I've tried it, and for me, Sony Vegas is just the best, easiest. Okay, and let me tell you why. You can download Sony Vegas, and you can get it in costs anywhere from $89 all the way up to $500. The $500 version of Sony Vegas is every bit as powerful as Avid or Adobe, and it's a whole lot more user friendly. It's very intuitive, and you have the option to go with many different tracks of video and audio, what you do with Avid and Adobe too. And so, but what I like about it is you just install it, it's ready to go. And the biggest thing about Sony Vegas is it's very friendly to the new video formats like AVC HD or MP4, or you can bring just about any kind of video file into Sony Vegas, and it will recognize it, and it will run it without having to wait, like, you know, hours for it to transcode into your specific file that you have to have for, like, an Avid. Well, Avid came out with something called Avid Media Access, which tries to do it. It sort of does it. It does it, you know, you have to download a specific template for what you want to bring in, and you have to go through all that hassle of, well, if I'm going to use AVC HD, I have to download the AMA for that. And it sort of works on Avid, and it works on Adobe, but on Sony, it works much faster, and it will work with most anything. As a matter of fact, I've been able to get and put a DVD, like regular old DVD that was a movie DVD, into the computer, and the Sony Vegas, in most cases, you could just take the file right off the DVD and bring it into your timeline, and you could use that to edit with. And so that was pretty amazing for me. But, you know, I brought in things downloaded off the internet, like MP4s, WMVs, AVC HD, P2, and the more expensive, you know, like the Sony file systems that are from the really more expensive cams. QuickTime will go into it. Even QuickTime ProRes will go into it, and it doesn't have a problem. And then you can put all these different formats on your timeline, and you can edit them all together. And then when you go to export, it will take it to the file you want to export it to, and bring it out. And you can just keep working and working on Sony Vegas and get your job done, and a lot quicker, because they have a lot more handles that for me are a lot easier for doing fades and so forth. But I'm going to go into you know, tutorials on many of these systems about, you know, the basics of how you install it, and then how you operate it, and how you do your basic editing on these systems. But I'm just telling you right now, my favorite, Sony Vegas. Lots of people still love Avid. I mean, if I have to do a high-end production project and it has a lot of elements, and I have to bring it all in, and I have to work with it and graphics and so forth, I can do a good job on Avid, I can do a good job on Adobe Premiere, and I can do a good job on Sony Vegas, especially the one that is the Vegas Pro, like Vegas Pro 12. And I could do the same job on Final Cut 10. And it'd be a little bit more of a challenge, especially if you're wanting to have multiple audio tracks, and if you're wanting to have multiple video tracks, you're wanting to go back and forth. It's just, you know, the design of FC10 is not what traditional professional video editors are used to. They can adapt and make it work, but I mean, it's the analogy. Why would you, if you had you know, a Cadillac or a really fancy car that had all the bells and whistles, and you went down to a motorcycle, and one that didn't have anything on it but the basics, and it couldn't go very fast, you know, why would you? And so, yeah, I sound like I'm down on Final Cut 10, and I am, because it's just such a departure from the powerful video editing systems. And I consider it basically a consumer grade video editing system. You know, if you want your kid to edit something or so forth. But, you know, if Apple had, like I said, if Apple had gone ahead and kept with the original Final Cut and just kept improving it, they would have owned the video editing world by now. But they had to make this weird departure. You know, I don't know if it was, I think it was after Steve Jobs left, so they didn't pay attention to what they were doing, or I don't know what the deal is, but, you know, they really abandoned the professional video editing world when they came out with FC10. So what I've had to migrate to is Sony Vegas, and I'm amazed at how easy it is to use, how user-friendly it is, and how it doesn't crash all the time, and how it will work on any computer. And so, you know, that's what my favorite is now. Now, if Sony does something stupid, I may have to go find something else. You know, it's like I did when I was working with the Apple, you know, with the Final Cut. You know, it was the greatest system ever, and then Apple went and did something stupid. So, and, you know, and even after they did something stupid, they didn't acknowledge that they did something stupid. They kept trying to make stupid keep working. And so, you know, and they took stupid and they made it a little bit better. And I know the people that love FC10 are screaming at me. Try a real video. My advice is try a real video editing system, master it, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Anyway, we're going to continue on with multiple classes, and we're going to go step by step into actually how to video edit. So that's the end of this introduction to video editing or overview of video editing, and I sure appreciate you, and we'll see you back in the future classes of video editing. Thank you so much.